Welcome to PTH with Dr. Q. I am so excited to be back here. It's been a while. Today we are joined by Dr. Simphiwe Ngwane, who is somebody who actually decided to go out of his way and study something that none of us would have thought would ever be studied. I'm very curious to learn more about what he's done, and I am sure for those of you that are familiar with Ilanga Letegu or Ilanga generally, before it became Ilanga Letegu, I'm going to find this very interesting as well. Dr. Ngwane, good to have you on the show. How are you?
Yeah, morning, Dr. Q. Thanks very much. No, all is well. It's finally a Friday as we wrap up the month of March, but I am good. And yourself?
Geez, I cannot believe we're actually wrapping up the first quarter of the year. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche each year. It's "Hi, unyaka uyashesha," but it really does feel like we are really. And for us, I think at the legislature where I work, we are wrapping up the financial year. So for us, it's quarter four, and we finished the financial year.
Oh, okay. I see. Dr. Ngwane, I don't want to waste any time because I know you said you have to go and attend to your other commitments. But please, can you just unpack for us this concept of igeza lensizwa, your thesis, your research, and the many other publications that you've made speak specifically about igeza lensizwa, and you marry this with Ilanga Letego, which is I think one of the oldest Zulu newspapers in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yes. So I think as we all might know, yes, it is one of the oldest, it's the oldest running Zulu newspaper. Uh, and I'm not sure if people have seen that last year, Prof. Nkulunga published the edited volume on Ilanga. So
Mm.
I was interested in the lifestyle supplement that came out with Ilanga from 2005 until it folded in 2013. So my interest was on
Mm.
that particular publication that was geared towards young people. And of course, as I did the research, I realized that it wasn't the first time Ilanga had tried to write for a youthful audience. They had attempted back in 1929 with a section called Pages for the Youth, where, of course, it was
Mm.
different. This way, old people writing letters on how young people should behave. And of course, there's context around that in the 1920s and 30s around Durban and policing of black labor. So that was the first time Ilanga wrote for the youth in a page called the Young Page. Pages for the Youth. And then skip forward to about 92, 93, the Ilanga had another section called Zisha Kakasin, which was written for a younger audience. So looking at kind of popular culture at the time, Maskandi was popular, which would dip and dive over the years, but they focused on kind of lifestyle, what is happening, who was throwing a party, and so the journalist will either go to Mekonum Sebenzi and take pictures or do reviews of recordings or CDs back in '92. So this continued Izish Kakasini until the early 2000s, and at the time you had the introduction of tabloids which became direct competition to Ilanga. There were some corporate decisions and around that, but I'm not sure if I'll go into it. But it's in the thesis on why Isolesa became direct competition to Ilanga, and so with that. You had a section that came out called Inkundla Yabasha, uh, which was a bit everywhere because we're trying to tackle the youth in high school and in varsity. So it didn't have a defined audience in that sense. And then fast forward with the entry of younger journalists. You then had Ilanga Letego that was launched in 2005. So that's just kind of the brief history on the audiences and how Ilanga has tried to remain relevant by, for example, writing for the youth. And then we had Ilanga Letego. And of course, we get to igeza lensizwa, which was a section where young men submitted photographs of themselves, or they were street casted by the journalist. But my interest with that, I think it also the main paper, Ilanga, had a section called Ubuhle Bendalo, which was usually a bare-breasted young woman, and he had a huge following. Of course, it was seen as indexing Zulu femininity, womanhood, and so of course that was the audience that was targeting women to be proud of themselves and who they are. But of course there was a double-edged kind of meaning, a double entendre, where young men also looked at it in a voyeuristic way. So it was popular, and so Ilanga Newspaper wanted to create something as popular as Ubuhle Bendalo, and that's how the invention of igeza came about. I think for now, I think I'll kind of leave it there to get that history on how it came about as to be a draw card that will bring people week by week to see every Thursday on who is igeza for that particular week.
That's very interesting. So you've said things that I had no idea of. One, you mentioned that CDs existed in 1992 already. The first time I saw a CD, I think, was around 2004. Maybe that's because we started seeing DVDs in households much around that time. So I find that to be a very interesting fact. But also, I had always thought that I don't know whether in Ilanga itself, there was a point where we saw women. I think there was a section that covered women as well and not just males. So I'm confusing it with the Soleza. But whichever it was, I always thought that those ladies were actually from Emhlangeni all the time. And so I'd always wondered whether even with the gents, are they from Umhlanga lensizwa na? And I've always wondered if there is an equivalent of umhlanga. I know this is something that is not covered in your thesis, but it's just something that I've always been curious about. Maybe you can touch on that?
Yeah. No, just to maybe correct myself, to know as the tapes, I think it was tapes at the time, not CDs. I think there's a lot that has happened that has changed over the years. It's difficult to keep track. I would say when I was 7 years old, what was it? Yeah, no. So that was the juxtapositioning. So Ubuhle Bendalo was always women bevunulile. So either it was their coming of age ceremony. It was a particular iconography that she was dressed as if it's a traditional affair, as opposed men they were encouraged. In the beginning, it was bare-breasted, showing their chest and their muscularity, and later it is more kind of fashion elements. So, I do kind of historicize some of the ideas of masculinity because, as I said, with women, you had umkhosumhlanga, where it also celebrated femininity and womanhood, and then later in the year, you have for men I went blank now. So if you look at this is a festival of the first fruits, and then it was also linked to the strangulation of the bull. If you remember, there was some coverage on the human rights. SPCA went into it. So that particular festival also focuses on if you look at history and the ethnography has been written on masculinity. So it was the men of the kingdom come together to doctor the king to make him strong. They wear their finery, their feathers, and they put ointments on their body to make it glisten. So if you read these historical accounts that describe men and how they were dressed, so there's an element of soft masculinity and the feathers and how their bodies glistened. If you read the documentation by I think R. Samuelson, who was an interpreter. If you look at thingy, who else can I think of? Isaac Nathaniel, who I think is the first person who'd written or had a sketch of Ushaga. There was a lot of dedication to ornamentation. So if you look at the two cultural aspects, umkhosi weshwama, where it celebrated masculinity, and then umkhosi umhlanga, which celebrated womanhood and femininity. So I think you can create those signposts about the kind of this dual gender, how it is celebrated.
I must confess, I've never heard about umkhosi wokushwama or weshwama before. This is very new to me, and it's something that I would love to go and read more about because I grew up in KwaZulu-NATAL and in the north particularly, but I'd never heard about umkhosi wokushwama. Maybe I might just make it there. I don't know.
But Dr. Q, I think it's also another thing to get the names differ. So I do know that in those kids then you call it something different. I just can't remember. So I'm from the south. Pietermaritzburg, and we might call it something different. But ordinarily, it's the festival of the first fruits. The first one, Omngane, happens in October, and then the main one happens in December.
Maybe just to wrap this one up, do men also hold umhlanga like ladies? Because I know with your ladies, they would go to umhlangeni, but then they would always be carrying umhlanga, reeds, I think. And
Reeds, yeah.
with gents, how does it then happen? Is there anything that is done? Do you know how the process goes?
Yeah, no, I've never attended one. I would love to. I think next week we must make a trip out of it. But what I've we must make a trip out of it. But what I've seen, it's because it's based on Ubutwa and the regiment system. So it's mostly amahubu and singing and
Yeah.
kind of regimental performances. But no, that they don't carry. I mean, unfortunately, men are held a different standard. So, ideas of purity and not losing one's purity or virginity, I think men, because of the double standards, are not held up to that standard. So, I don't, the issue of holding up umhlanga, and if it flops over, it signals something. I think it's not to the same standard that unfortunately men are held against, or young men.
Okay, no, thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. So I'm interested to know now. We've got this concept of igeza lensizwa. One, I would love to know where the concept itself comes from, and I would love for you to touch a bit on ubusoga. And it would be particularly interesting for me if you could distinguish between the two concepts.
Okay, so in Zulu, like igeza lensizwa, if you look at the dictionary definition, it would just be a young man approaching manhood. I think that with the beginning, I kind of started off with the dictionary definition.
Yes, you did.
Because I wanted to look at what each of the words meant, igeza and lensizwa. And so it of course, it's gendered by insizwa. So insizwa is a young person, I think, kind of more, I think, what, 17, 18, up to the 20s, if you kind of look at the makeup of the word. And an igeza will be a good-looking person of any age. So when it's the key thing when you look at the definition was a man who's approaching manhood, and manhood was kind of differentiated when you wore is toto, and that would be when you're of marriageable age. So there was an indication that there was something about dress that differentiated a young person and an older person. So I began with that, and then over the duration of my PhD, I was looking at, okay, what is igeza lensizwa beyond the dictionary definition, because I wanted to articulate a concept that could capture what was igeza in those 9 years or 10 years that it ran. And if you look at the descriptions, I came to the conclusion, or I kind of tabled my contemporary definition, because it ran for 2006 to 2013. It was a young man who had self-regard and self-confidence, and who utilized self-stylization. So I came up with that because the descriptors that were in the captions would always highlight that we want young men abazitembayo and abazizwayo. And then so I went through the analysis of looking at these reflective terms and what that entails. And I mean, I think maybe it's important to also highlight that the captions were written in a female persona. So it was written in as if it is a young woman describing and ekuzela, or kind of ululating or appreciating a young man. So those key descriptors were there of uzetemba and uzizwa. So a young man had to embody these two dispositions. And then, of course, being the persona of a woman, the young man also had a woman to entice, and achaze mutosfazane, so to excite a young woman. So the captions was the captions and the images is where I was locating the definition, because the captions were written for two audiences, for young men to look and see if they could submit, because there was a casting call that if you think you are igeza, submit. But of course, you had to assess on what the caption is saying, that fanele uzetembe and uzizwe. And so those were what you had to embody, and of course you had to then also play to the female gaze of uyakwazi ukuchaza umuntu wesifazane or ukuheha umuntu wesifazane. It was, I think I would say it was a temporal concept because I think I can't, the section no longer exists. So I based it on the 10 years of what does igeza, what igeza meant for those 10 years. So it embodies self-confidence, self-regard, and self-stylization.
Okay, beautiful. And I'd love to know from you. You mentioned that this ran for about 9 years with Ilanga, and for me, I feel like some people really appreciated that that section of Ilanga Newspaper, Exhibit A, in front of me, and excuse me. I'm curious to know, why do they have to stop showing that section? Why did they stop publishing that particular section? Was there an outcry from the public or what?
No, it's quite unfortunate because it was very popular. It started in 2005, and
Yeah.
it used to come out with the Thursday issue. And traditionally, the Thursday issue had a lower circulation compared to the Monday
Yes.
issue. And so the supplements was included in the Thursday issue. And within a year, if you look at the circulation figures, the Thursday issue was now outselling the Monday issue. And if you speak to the editorial team, they proudly say it was because of our supplements that the Thursday issue outsold it, because the Monday one set the tone, what was happening in politics, what was happening around the country. So that was the most bought one. And then so it's over a year with the introduction of Ilanga Newspaper, the Thursday one began to outsell, and it attracted a lot of advertising. So you had your Nokia 3310s at the time, your Motorola Razr. So all these kind of cell phone and clothing company specifically wanted to have their adverts in the lifestyle supplements. So that also tells you that the advertisers were noticing that, hey, there's something there with this lifestyle supplements. Mm-hmm. So, but unfortunately, it coincided with a very huge, I think one of the biggest kind of strikes or protest or strike actions, I think, because the journalists were not happy. There was issues with Ilanga, and subsequently, I think over 10, if not 20 journalists were fired. And now, I mean, so it's not a huge kind of production compared to perhaps your kind of News 24 or whatnot. So, I mean, losing about half of your staff compliments, and most of these were the younger journalists and a few of the older stalwarts. So at the time, a decision was made to pour resources in sustaining the mother paper, Ilanga, which has been in existence since the turn of the 20th century. And unfortunately, a decision was made to, because at the time, there were many other supplements. There was Ilanga Letegu, Ilanga Lasekaya, which was more of a home economics sort of subject on and stuff. So the paper was growing and having all these multiple sections that catered for different audiences. But it just came down to the head count, how many journalists they have. And the focus was on preserving the mother paper. And unfortunately, when I spoke to some of the journalists and the managing director of, as you know, Ilanga, the managing director, it's under a managing company of Matla. So I did an interview with him, Arthur Corning Cromer. And it's a decision which he also feels it was unfortunate because it was doing so well with the young people. So it was a purely headcount that's preserve the mother paper, and unfortunately all the supplements kind of folded and they stopped being produced.
At the mention of the editorial team, I'd be keen to know, maybe this is one of the things that you covered as well. Would you say they're sort of like acted as a gatekeepers? Let's say, for instance, I wanted to be featured as a man, as a Zulu man. I'm not even sure if they're specific, whether it's a Zulu man or if they were inclusive of other tribes as well. But if I sent through my image and wanted to be featured in the newspaper, do you think that they would have acted as gatekeepers, or they would just select anybody that came forth?
Yeah. No, I mean it was a collaborative approach, let me say. I mean, so of course they set the casting direction of who we want. And in the thesis I kind of go over that. In the beginning was more kind of chiseled and bare-breasted men, and for them that is what they wanted. So the photographers and had to find young men around South Beach or the botanical gardens,
Mm.
go to UKZN DUT, and the photographers will tell me that sometimes you'll approach young men and ask them to if they could take off their shirts so they can get photographed. So there were those that were okay with it, and there were those that I'm like, I don't understand why I should show my chiseled pics. So with the editorial decisions, the journalists then would decide what for them constitutes igeza lensizwa. And it was if you when I interviewed them, they were trying to restore kind of sense of pride in oneself and how you looked and taking care of your body. So that was their initial framing that we're trying to counter, because at the early 20th century, at the early 2000s, you had you had Oman Pincha and Al Vovo, kind of more heavier body men. And they were saying we're trying to counter that as young people, that we kind of want to take care of yourselves. We know that this particular body type is popular. So there is that kind of articulation in the caption. If you look at the early ones in the 2006, where they say, we know that men, the kind of more sexier ones, or kind of the ones that kind of look like they have money, look a particular way, but we're trying to show more healthier types of masculinities. And so that was the editorial team determining what they wanted. But of course, there was backlash at times where the young men decided that we don't want to go topless anymore. To be igeza or a young person means more than being topless. So the definition of who got printed was also determined by young men who then, I think, the topless section only lasted for 2 years because young men was just not keen on being photographed topless. And then you had more the kind of fashion inspired, where now the photographers were attending kind of Fashion Week or the Durban July and photographing young men in stylized fashion. And so you'll get what the journalists wanted, and then you'll get the young men what they were comfortable with. So it was a co-construction of what was igeza that was happening. And of course, it was predominantly Zulu men, but they did photograph, they did include a few kind of foreign African nationals. And in other years, when they couldn't get young men, then they'll include your Chris Brown or your Lunga Shabalala, any celebrity,
Oh,
and
I
they'll do the
remember
same thing.
those.
That they were Muslim. Yeah. I mean, before I think there's one distinct one I remember of Shabalala when he was, I think he just been appointed as an presenter for Selima Tsunzi. And so he was on, and he was
Yes.
the I think he was the brand ambassador for Calvin Klein. So he was there on building his profile, and one of the platforms he built it was on Ilanga Newspaper. So that was, yeah. So there was a co-construction, a co-production of youthful urban masculinities, and as I said, it was mostly young Zulu men, but there was one or two that were not Zulu.
Okay, interesting. And I suppose for me, the reason why I asked the previous question is because I want to know how you think that shaped Zulu masculinity in itself. Because here you get this widely consumed newspaper, which is Ilanga, and whenever we get to that particular section, we get a man portrayed in a particular image. So, how do you think that shaped Zulu masculinity or masculinity in general?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it shaped it positively because I think part of the theory I kind of adopt in the thesis was the idea of transgressive masculinities. Because the traditional sense of masculinity
Yeah.
by scholars like Cornell and in South Africa, we had Morale, was that there's hegemonic masculinities and then there's subordinate masculinities and marginalized masculinities. So the kind of in a hierarchical sense that there's a top guy, and then there's one that kind of looks up to the other, and then there's those that are marginalized, perhaps kind of men that might be homosexual. So those would be kind of relegated to the marginalized masculinities. So with igeza,
Mm.
what I was kind of reading and analyzing through that theory is that because it believed in non-hierarchical masculinities, where men put together what they thought and wanted to be. So ideas of kind of situated subjectivity on who you are. In Durban, you're studying, you're students, and this is how I want to. So it is almost like an identity that you decide how you want to fashion yourself. So I really think that it pushed back at kind of more harmful supposed hegemonic Zulu masculinities, which kind of focus on and kind of more militant masculinities. So in this sense, it required young men to self-reflect. So in that idea, when a young man saw igeza for that week, they were asked to reflect. Do you think you can be one next week? Do you think you have enough self-regard and self-confidence? So it posed those reflexive questions on young men, and in the sense that, can you compete with this young person? They're asking, do you embody these characteristics of being inward looking? Because the ideas of self-regard and self-confidence are not conceited in the way that you are comparing yourself to say, I'm better than this person. It is, according to, I think, Ike Ude, which is a Nigerian-American scholar, is that the way to save yourself from public scrutiny is to engage in self-objectification, where you focus on yourself and don't pay mind on what people think of you. So Igeza, in that sense, I think it helped push back on more harmful Zulu masculinities that were prevalent and allowed young men to embody self-stylization where they are skinny jeans and be topless if they want to be, and they got validation through the female persona, who then validated who they were, because the other idea which I look at is, I mean, you get igeza and you get what is the word, to another concept of being isoga. And another quality of being isoga is to be admired by both men and women. So the caption and the image allowed men to be admired by both sexes. And so I think this is another relation I looked at, but I didn't quite go into it because I was inferring it, that it really asked men to confront masculine beauty. And of course, there were male photographers when I asked them that how did you identify the young men? And they're like, oh, well, we got a brief. I mean, but you as a young man, you had to subjectively look at another man and assess whether they're good looking and they can be photographed. And so there was a bit of dodging that question. And then when I then framed it to ask them, then who wrote the caption? Because the captions are written in the form of ukuzela. So to admire a young man and admire how they look, comment on their skin, that it's soft as Denon and stuff. And they also ran away from the question, say, we didn't write that. So there was an inquiry that I couldn't go through. But I think I can infer that they were being encouraged to see masculine beauty, and to celebrate it, I think, because there was a thin line for them. They're like, but no, that really goes into questions of desire. And I'm like, no, but it's not sexual desire. It's you are acknowledging beauty and stuff. So it was interesting comparing what the female editorial team was saying and what the men were saying, choosing to not acknowledge masculine beauty. But I think with the thesis, I really pushed that it was encouraging that for young men to look at another man and yes, assess whether they have those dispositions, but to also, is this young man good looking, and am I good looking as well? So I found that interesting to kind of, but I said it was an inquiry that I thought of towards the end.
Doc, so my thing on the question of shaping Zulu masculinity or masculinity generally, it links much on that last statement that you just made. Because I remember at school, girls would be, you made an example about Lunga Shabalala, and I remember girls had that middle section that had Ulunga Shabalala. And they would be like, they would be talking to somebody who is obviously the opposite of what Lunga would be. A bit chubby, a bit meaty, as opposed to somebody who is defined. And for me, that seems like Ilanga sort of like created a culture where the beauty of a Zulu man has to do with their physical appearance. Because if you are chubby, then you should not be considered as somebody who is handsome, right? I don't know if that was the intended purpose for Ilanga, for a lack of a better term. I would love to believe not, but I did see that happening in our society, especially at school, because I was at school at that time. Amantombazane, they would always lean towards guys that were skinnier and guys that played soccer, and not so much your chubby guys, because they had normalized. And I would not pin this on Ilanga, but just using them as an example, I think they may have had an influence. They had normalized beauty to be something that looks like that, right? But I was smirking when you mentioned Isoga earlier, because at the mention of that term, the one person that I actually thought about was Umadlanduna. I'm not sure if you remember Umadlanduna. He was liked by most women, Guakalanyonini, and I'm not sure if men liked him, but he found it easy to work with everybody. So I suppose that is some sort of liking. And I don't know, when you say that Isoga is somebody that is liked by both men and women, in what context you say that? Do you mean like men find that person physically attractive to a point that they would want to be like them, to associate with them, and whatnot? I don't know. In what context were you using that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the context is admiration. The context is that they admired his prowess.
Okay.
And I think if you know the term of soga, so they would appreciate how
It-
mercurious his tongue is, and the dexterity and how he could achame amantombazane. So it was an admiration. So that's why I was saying that to being Isoga thrived on admiration on both ends. So women being able to be wooed by those techniques, and for men to admire his ability to articulate himself and to woo women. So it wasn't in a physical or sexualized or kind of desire sense. It was admiration on his ability to woo. And just going back to your earlier question, I think it's also important to look at Ilanga Newspaper in context. In the early 2000s, there was the I think at the time, Men's Health, what is the other one? FHSM, if I remember correctly. So there was a medley of
I know Men's
men's
Health.
lifestyle magazines. Men's Health, GQ, Destiny Man. So there was a medley of magazines that were entering the South African market at the time, in the early 2000s. So Ilanga Letegu was also reflecting on what was happening in popular culture and in the media space, and of course trying to be relevant. They kind of saw, okay, this is a direction that the media kind of articulation of men and being kind of being more well defined. But if you remember, the disclaimer they made is like, we understand that there's different ways they might be heftier men, but we're trying to move you towards a healthier. So the definition of healthy being small. So it was in that sense that it was they are foregrounding a healthier masculinity, but also looking at it in context that they were seeing GQ and Destiny Man and Men's Health, and picking up that this is the public script of masculinity in this period.
Yeah. So what was interesting for me in what you said earlier was the fact that young men did not want to be publicized half naked. When I think shortly after we started seeing, before I even say shortly, you said this ran for 9 years. When did Amageza and Lensizwa start being published in Ilanga? Was it in 1992?
No. There was Ubuhle Bendalo. Igeza started in 2006,
okay, that was
February 2006. Yes.
Perfect. Because I think about 6-7 years later, we would start seeing companies like your famous Cosme Black that had young men. I'm not sure if you know about famous Cosme Black, which was also in Durban. I think they still exist even now. where young men would go and they would sign up and they would just showcase their beauty. Others would be half naked, of course. Others would even be in their Speedos. So I found it particularly interesting that with Ilanga, there were people that did not actually want to be portrayed in that sense, when now you find tons of people wanting to reveal their abs and I would say physical beauty generally without clothes on. And I wonder what would have influenced that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, because if you look at the beginning, because when speaking with the editorial team, so Tobile Ngumalo, Nozanile Tembe, and I think some of them work on Ukozi now, so they're still very much in the media industry. If you recall, I think Shaga Marine World was just built,
Mm.
and so they were telling me that Shaga Marine would had a beauty contest of I think Mr. Marine World or whatnot. Uh, and so there was a pool of young men that they were tapping into. So when they couldn't street cast young men at the Botanical Gardens or at Howard College, they would use that pool. So I found it interesting that and they also worked with agencies. So I think it goes back to,
Mm.
I think these were, some of them were young men that had modeling ambitions. But this section didn't want to be some way where you, I don't know, showcase your career, or they wanted ordinary men. So of course they did approach those that were contestants at Mr. Shagar Marine World or Mr. DUT or Mr. MUT, and so those were also highlighted. But they didn't want to be to be seen as a platform where it's just the only the Lunga Shabalalas. They also wanted just an ordinary person that was going to a psychology 202 class second year who looks good. So an ordinary person. They had people that were working in factories in around Pantan. So they wanted to showcase the whole myriad of not just students or just people that were who had ambitions to be models. So I think just some of the pushback was that it was ordinary people, and so in that sense, they were then also engaged in that idea that this is not our idea of what igeza is topless. Can you just photograph me with my floral Uzi shirt with my distressed jeans? So yeah, so that was the
Mm.
pushback that they got. Yeah.
But looking at the times that we're in now, you see a lot of young people posting on your social media. They are not dressed. They go for grooming. They dress nicely. Your Uzis, for instance. Would you associate those with vanity?
Sorry, I didn't catch your question. Can you please repeat?
No, I'm saying right now we see a lot of people posting on social media. It's either they're going, young people, young males in particular, they go to your sobe man, they are grooming themselves. Others, they are posting half naked. Others, it's with the clothing. They're just showcasing their beautiful and expensive clothes. Would you associate that with vanity?
I feel like, I don't know, it's quite a loaded a word, vanity, because I think it just goes back to the whole idea of, I mean, I think it's Carol Tulloch, the I think she's a Caribbean scholar or British scholar, who says
Mm.
style or styling is a form of autobiography. So it showcases one's ambitions and one's abilities or inabilities. So I would push back and say it's not vanity. It's a form of self-stylization, how you identify yourself and how you want to project yourself. And I mean, with the whole sobe, I mean, I was quite shocked that in the early 2000s, Ilanga Newspaper were writing articles that we understand that young men are now participating in grooming. I think at the time, I forget the guy's name. He was in Boomchaka, he had dreadlocks. So there was a lot of interest in men's hair and skin products. So Ilanga actually wrote a quite a page article on this phenomena of metrosexuality in the early 2000s. And I thought it was quite interesting. Early 2000s, I don't think you there was much interest in L'Oreal for men, in other products, but here Ilanga Zulu Ilanga lifestyle supplements, noticing the subtle shifts in young men and what they taking care of their bodies. So I think I don't. It's yeah. I'll shy away from vanity. I think I'll stick to the scholarly idea of styling as a form of autobiography.
Mm. Doc, it seems to me like you are a person who is anti-hard masculinity. That's what I could get from when I was reading your thesis, by the way, and when I read your many other publications. I can already tell your position as a scholar, but I would also love to, and it's something you mentioned here. I think you mentioned military masculinity earlier. What is problematic about this military masculinity? Do you think that society should lean more towards your soft masculinity?
Yeah, yeah. I think okay. How I positioned it, I think in the thesis is, I mean, it is a problem, but I'll come back to that. But I think the main problem I had is that scholars somewhat kind of in a reductionist way to say Zulu men have this history of hardness and militance and ubutwa and regiments. So if you look at scholarship, it's really about regimented masculinities and also blue collar circular migration with apartheid and going to work in the mines. So my pushback was that there is a larger archive where we locate hard masculinities and soft masculinities. And if you remember earlier, I was discussing Umkhoso Shwama, where it was very much a hard masculinity where men grabbed a bull and twisted its neck and stuff. And then, of course, isilo with imiti and stuff. So you get that hard masculinity in the sense that it's very militant in the sense of Amabuto. But if I then said, if you look at the ornamentation and you look at ethnographers in the late 1800s and how they described and young men, there was also I just went blank now. There was one scholar who had a whole chapter on Zulu men's dress and spoke about this Umkhoso Shwama, that when you went to one of these, brought out your best plumes. You're wearing plumes from ostriches, plumes from Ifafa Elihle, which is a lilac-breasted roller, Isakambuli, which is the widow bird. So and also the hides you wear. So there was a lot invested in ornamentation within this archive that I'm setting. So that was a pushback that I think we focused so much on the one-sided archive. But when you look at it, you need to broaden that soft masculinities and hard masculinities live side by side. And we kind of need to look at both because we've forgotten the softer elements of being a Zulu man. It's the glistening skin when they put tallow on their body. There were descriptions that when the wind there was a breeze that the feathers used to catch the breeze. So there was so much description in ornamentation, and I think we cannot sidestep that and say that didn't contribute to umuntu ezizwa with yeah, no, ngikogile and stuff that was there with the hardness of Zulu masculinity. So so I think that is, of course, there's a personal element. I think as a gay man growing up and also confronting masculinity and also being reflective of myself, I'm like, there's not one particular way and stuff. So it was also kind of in the beginning, I think in the introduction chapter, I speak of that, of confronting my own masculinity growing up. And so this was somewhat of a cathartic experience on looking at masculinity and understanding that masculinities don't have to be hierarchical. They can be transgressive. You borrow some aspects from the hard, some aspects from the soft, and you create your own idea of being a man. Yeah.
Yeah, Doc, in the interest of time, I'm looking at my PC here and I see that we are almost running out. So I'm going to ask maybe one or two questions to wrap this up. And I say that with a bleeding heart because, like I said before we started, I've got tons of questions when it comes to this. Maybe we may want to have a part two. Because I'd love to touch on what is happening in the contemporary times in relation to the concept of ukuba igeza lensizwa, and marrying that with soft masculinity, which is, I think, becoming a thing nowadays. And without having to expand much on that, there's two concepts that I would love for you to unpack for me, and that would be your fluid and plural masculinity, which I also saw coming up in your thesis. What's the distinction between the two?
I mean, the fluid, I think it speaks to the transgressive in the sense that one kind of borrows from what they want to create. So I think it falls within the ambit of transgressive masculinity, and plural in the sense that it's not just I don't know, ideas of being ibinga and what that means to be a young man that is ibinga. So and you subscribing to what that the understanding is. And a more free, I mean, I think it was Malusi Langa in a 2002 article. I think he also writes about masculinity, that is important for us to kind of look at masculinities that push back at hegemony. And I think that's the direction of kind of critical masculinity studies or masculinity theory, is to look at much more microcosmic masculinities. And because I know in kind of like the key scholar in I think it was 90, he wrote a seminal article. It was Robert Morrell in 1998, and kind of broke down South African masculinity into four groupings. And so that was the direction of scholarship at the time, even with Rowan Cornell in Australia. But in recent times, works like, I'm sure you know his work, Professor Ndu Ngidi, and many other young scholars in South Africa, there's a push to look at much more context and macro, because I think there's another, what is it called? I think, but this was very theoretical by Kopan Ratele, looking at hegemonies in the margins. That a man that doesn't work, perhaps as a taxi driver, he might not have economic power, but within that realm of the taxi rank, he might possess power and stuff. So it all goes back to looking at masculinities that are in the margins, and within the margins, that there are also deviations. So it I think it really speaks to that. The plurality of it, that it's not just hegemonic is the one that has money, is educated, and can have a family and support, or is umselego. It's much broader than just the kingpin, and then all the marginalized ones at the bottom.
Interesting. And I would love to shift away from your PhD now and ask about what we're observing nowadays. We see young men, by how you've defined fluidity in this context, we see young men becoming fluid people, but then we see others resisting the fluidity. And especially those that come from your typical rural areas, and I will use KZN as an example here. They would not want to be on the softer side because that contradicts the belief system of how a man should be in their communal areas or in their villages, or whatever term you may want to use there. And I wonder, in your thinking, how do we create a society that is receptive of people that are more on the softer side of masculinity rather than the hard side, as we used to see back in the day?
Yeah, no, I think it's very I think it's very much really context specific, because I think the context where one finds themselves, unfortunately, also determines how, because I mean these kind of dual gender roles are reinforcing. So it takes a lot for one to decide that I will not adhere to the standards set by me, by my family in Epulwa. I will be my own self. So it's also that courage to be able to self-articulate. But I think it's the context where one finds themselves, unfortunately, also creates those glass ceilings. But I think as more people, I think the interesting, if I go back to the paper, it was a lot of how could you say, educational migrants. So people that came from the periphery, from Camperdown and came to Durban, came from Estenga. So it was showcasing the I don't know the ability to re-articulate yourself when you move away from where you're from and go experience something different. It frees the self.
Mm.
So I think until people are more kind of welcome, not even welcome, because I mean it's not a threat to perhaps hard masculinities. I think to allow oneself to be who they are, be it forms of masculinity or ideas of sexual desire. I think it requires a tolerant society, not in a tolerance that as if you must um, kind of tiptoe around people, but the ability to live, let live, and allow people to articulate. I mean, we have a fantastic constitution that allows us and very forward legislation. So it's very unfortunately it's just that ability to live, let live, because it takes nothing away from the next person on how you articulate yourself. So it's really the people in those particular, as you say, using the example of Ebulwa, for them to broaden their own minds and understand that there can be many ways of being igeza, let's say Ebulwa. It's not a one set way.
Doc, I am afraid I'm going to have to ask us to end it here because we are right. I think it's now 10 o'clock or 3 minutes before 10 o'clock. If we continue further, I feel like after this recording, you may just reprimand me for not adhering to your request. So I would love for us to put a pause here, but I would also love to have either you or Prof. Ngiti. He has been here on the show, by the way, previously. And I would love to get I'd say because your thinking is aligned and your research sort of like speaks to each other, it would be interesting to get different perspectives on this concept of lensizwa and masculinity in itself. Another person I would love to see there is actually Professor Siseko. Yena, he writes more on ubukaba, but I think he would add value to the conversation as well. It is my plea in front of everyone here that you would consider having a live session with me together with those three gentlemen. And yeah, I suppose the rest we'll talk about offline. Just give me a thumbs up and I will be the happiest man.
Yeah, no, but it's very fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of young scholars tackling kind of indigenous concepts, and it's really quite exciting. The work that is currently out on not just falling for concepts like Black dandyism, but our idea of dandyism is igeza lensizwa. Let's utilize our own indigenous concepts instead of borrowing French concepts and kind of forcing our context to, on them.
Interesting. When I was looking this is up online, after my attempted failure, I saw a lot of that concept, which I had never seen before online. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. But I chose not to make a reference to that concept because I thought you are very much like me, very much fixated on our indigenous terminology when it comes to igeza lensizwa. Doc, with that said, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you on the show again. You are now a friend of PTH, by the way, and we are happy to welcome you as part of the family.
All right. No, thanks very much. It was an absolute pleasure being in conversation with you. So and thank you to your viewers.
Thank you very much.